All right, well, on the way up, I told Steve he could have not set up a better flow for our discussion today, because I'm going to take a little bit different tack. I'm going to disagree with everything you've heard, and I'm also going to agree with everything you heard and explain why you guys, in terms of looking towards the future, to get time to plug in your hybrid. We just heard from David that the cloud is real, and we completely agree. If you look out there, people are spending 6 times today what they were last year on cloud. So absolutely understood and agree, cloud is real. 55% of CIOs out there are spending more on cloud. So David's definitely on to something. But, as I mentioned, it's time to plug in your hybrid. Between security, control, and risk, we see a lot of people that aren't ready to put their position all in to the cloud. All sorts of business risk, all sorts of things. And we just saw last week, people in big shops are losing a lot of data, access to data, due to events that none of us have any control over. So, as he mentioned, we're kind of in this in-between state where companies are not ready to put everything in the cloud. The cost looks great, the scalability looks great, but security, control, and true enterprise class high availability is not there yet. And that's why you see people moving to a hybrid cloud model. It absolutely makes sense. Some data belongs out in the cloud and some doesn't. Nobody has ever really won by taking a religious stance on a technology. And we believe a hybrid approach to cloud and storage is the way to go. Now, what do I mean by that? We've seen a lot of statistics about virtualization, VDI, database this morning. And this is a neat study our friends over at Enterprise Strategy Group did earlier this year. We're seeing the blue bars there are last year, the average number of VMs per physical server that people are running on average. And you can see a peak there, about 5 to 10 VMs per physical server. Everybody's trying to get to 11 all the way up to over 25 VMs per server. Obviously, the economics make sense, and that's great to do. But we're all a bunch of storage heads in here. We know what that means. That's just turning up the storage blender. As it's round-robining all that I/O, it's making it worse for us poor storage guys underneath. So we heard a lot this morning about all-flash arrays. All-flash arrays are awesome at resolving the I/O blender because they don't have the physical latency of spinning disk. But, and they're all saying that the days of dollars per gigabyte are all over. Pop quiz, does anybody know what drive that is? ST506. That's correct. It's an old Seagate 5 megabyte drive that's about the size of this picture. And as Tom said, dollars per gigabyte have moved, but the IOPS have not. So we're in this tension that's always been there between dollars per gigabyte and dollars per IOP. And we at Tegile, we love flash and we use flash as well, but we also use hard drives. The way we do that is we put flash in our system as a cache, and it makes that storage from the hard drive performance problem effectively go away. So then we can resolve dollars per gigabyte with our hard drive back end and dollars per IOP with flash at the front end. I hope we can, one of the questions that maybe one of you guys can write it down, let's talk about what's the dollars per gigabyte that an all-flash array is running at versus what's the dollar per gigabyte of a spinning disk running at, and where does that actually belong in somebody's data center for all intents and purposes. And Matt or one of you guys, you can help me here. All flash arrays, depending on RAID level and configuration, are probably at street price between $5 and $12 per gigabyte. Is that a fair number? when we bring physical spinning hard disk back into the equation, we can resolve that down to $1 a gig. So again, hit the IOPS and the dollars per gigabyte at the same time. And that's what hybrid storage is all about. We heard a bit this morning about some suboptimal approaches to resolving this. And there's another place we agree some places, and some places we don't. Throwing more and more spindles at it, and that's a new statistic I heard this morning, David. That's an interesting one. I actually tweeted, I said, dang, I didn't put that on my data sheet. Terabytes per pound, or per, I think you said, that was a new one. But that's the problem with the throwing more and more spindles at it. Using solid state as yet another tier. I like to call that playing Tetris with your data. The system is watching what I call I/O density. How many IOs per second, per megabyte, per minute is your data running at? And your storage system is trying to put the data at the right tier, the right place. Well, all that movement is actually slowing the system down. We had one customer that we replaced a tiering system with because every night at 2 in the morning, their Exchange server would crash. And they figured out the reason that was happening was the tiering engine started. And it was taking up so many cycles in the storage system, the latency coming back to the Exchange server got so high that the Exchange server says, I'm out, and it would crash. That tiering just gets in the way of the performance when run. And then the all-flash arrays, there's some places that's great. And we actually have an all-flash configuration, but we have a hard drive twist on the back end to resolve down to $1 a gig. So all-flash is great for what we like to call, especially being a mid-range storage guy, up in the fringe. That's fantastic. We're out trying to solve real-world storage problems at real-world dollars per gigabytes. And the way we do that, and the optimal way to approach this, is we've heard a lot about memory and solid state, but using it as a cache, not as the primary storage device. Again, we still need to resolve dollars per gigabyte. Especially in the mid-market, buying storage between $5 and $12 per gigabyte doesn't nail it. Rob's PowerPoint file doesn't need to go on flash. Simple as that. The way we get there is very similar to what Matt talked about. Using deduplication inline and compression inline. And what's neat about that, when you do it inline, we can actually put, dedupe compression. Everybody goes, okay, that fixes your dollars per gigabyte. You can put that much more storage on your hard disks. Well, when architected correctly, you can actually run deduplication and compression in front of that cache and actually put that much more data in cache, sending your cache hit ratio through the roof relative to uncompressed and non-deduplicated data, and run at all flash type speeds, but not forgetting about the dollars per gigabyte. And then lastly, running in a unified fashion. I believe it was Tom mentioned earlier, running unified is fantastic, both block and file. Being able to consolidate more and more silos of storage. What's right next to a block-based virtual desktop infrastructure? Usually a file share for all of those users' home directories. So there is a place to put Rob's PowerPoint file. So being able to consolidate on that single system is important as well. So as I mentioned, we agree with everything you've heard this morning, and we also disagree with everything you heard this morning. And I hope I've given you some ideas on things to checkpoint when you're evaluating your next storage acquisition and how to both resolve dollars per gigabyte and dollars per IOP. And lastly, I hope I've given you some good fodder to throw some good questions at the panelists after lunch. Thank you.